Zimbabwe.
Hello, this is Africa. My name is Stanley Kwenda, and today I have with me here Takura Zhangazha, a political analyst here in Zimbabwe. We are going to be talking about what has been happening post the 31 July harmonized election. Mr. Zhangazha, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Mr. Zhangazha, I just want to start by asking you some of the things that has happened after this election. The MDC has been challenging the election result, particularly the presidential election result, and they went to court. Was this the best that they could do?
In terms of the constitution, they had no option. If they had a grievance with the electoral outcome, particularly the presidential electoral outcome, they had no option.
Yeah, but while they were going to court, simultaneously SADC leaders, SADC organizations which observed elections in Zimbabwe were endorsing this election. Was there any, wasn't this a futile exercise?
No, it wasn't, because they participated in the drafting of the new constitution, which provides such remedies, such as those of going to court if you have a constitutional challenge concerning the electoral results. Therefore, it was not futile. It was necessary, and it was in tandem with what the new constitution stipulates.
Yeah. But what does the SADC endorsement mean to the MDC, to the people of Zimbabwe, and to this election?
Well, fundamentally, it means that there is no direct mediation in Zimbabwe's politics by SADC anymore, unless a new crisis emerges. But the global political agreement is now done. According to SADC, there's a full and fully democratic or fairly elected government. And as such, there's no further debate about SADC's role in Zimbabwe. And that basically means the MDC and or the people of Zimbabwe should not anticipate any direct intervention in Zimbabwe's affairs by SADC.
Just a day before the SADC summit in Malawi, we saw the MDC going back to court. Just days after it had filed its opposition to the presidential election result. We saw them going back to the court to withdraw their petition. What could have influenced that decision?
Well, I think it's a matter that the lawyers for the MDC are best placed to answer. But given their statements as reported in the mainstream media, I think there were two issues. First, a lack of confidence in the courts, according to the MDC, as well as a lack of evidence to present before the Constitutional Court, because there were two cases. The one was asking ZEC, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, to provide evidence or information about how the votes were counted and the voters' roll, amongst other things. And the second one was then to take the petition to the Constitutional Court. So I think the matter is related to two issues. First, there was no direct confidence on the part of the MDC in the court process. And then secondly, the lawyers had attempted to get further evidence from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission.
And according to the law, it seems the MDC only had that option of going to court to challenge this election result. It seems now that they have withdrawn this court case, their options are coming fewer. What now for the MDC?
Well, the court case is still to be determined on Tuesday. The Constitutional Court has ruled that the withdrawal is of limited legal consequence. So they still have to argue their case, or their lawyers still have to argue the legality of the petition. So that's still an option for the MDC. But fundamentally, they have to go back to their own membership to consult, advise, or even get advice from their party membership on their way forward.
Some people say the loss of the MDC in this election was more to do with their own inability to regenerate, recultivate their support base. Do you agree with that kind of assertion?
Well, I think the jury is still out on why exactly the MDC's vote count diminished over the last 4 years, and as evidenced by the results announced by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. Yeah, but there are issues to do with their role in the inclusive government compromising their ability to focus on their own party business, and their ability to campaign effectively outside of the framework of the media and within a grassroots sort of like mode or framework.
We will come back to the issue of the MDC and its future, but right now it's becoming inevitable that Zimbabwe is going to have a ZANU-PF government for the next 5 years. What sort of government do you envisage from ZANU-PF?
Well, in the initial stages, it will be a very triumphant one. They'll try and demonstrate that their victory was legitimate, and they'll, as far as it's possible, try and implement the policies they promised in their manifestos. But in the more long term, they'll be a bit more pragmatic about the political economy of the country. They will not necessarily introduce the Zimbabwean dollar in a rush. They'll bide their time. They'll deal with their succession issues within ZANU-PF on a more democratic basis. They'll try as much as is possible not to be seen as a pariah government within the region, because they don't have any direct contestation either in parliament or in central government itself. And therefore, yeah, they will be more benevolent than they will be dictatorial. They'll try and distribute state largesse, try and up their performance legitimacy in government, but they won't be as dictatorial as previously seen. They will try to be more benevolent, but still demonstrate flashes of the iron fist.
Yeah. From their previous record in government, this country has somehow gone on a downward spiral. Could Zimbabweans be justified not to expect anything from the ZANU-PF government? I'm looking at the state of the economy in 2007, 2008, where the industry came to a complete halt. Health services completely broken down, schools closed. Could there be any hope under this government?
Well, I think you're correct to infer that the past policies or economic environments will inform perceptions. But I think even ZANU-PF itself has probably learned from the mistakes of the past. And in any event, it has argued that it has undertaken its revolutions beyond irreversibility, as written in the Constitution, on the land issues, for example. So the fear that things will go back to being as bad as they were in 2007, 2008, might not be necessary as we look forward, or might not be realistic as we look forward. There will be economic challenges, but they won't be as bad. ZANU-PF can afford it, because in order for it to manage its succession, and in order for it to be legitimate in 2018, when the next election is due, it has to demonstrate astute performance as a government, because the political issues are not at a high crescendo as they were 5 or 6 years ago.
You seem to be optimistic about the chances of ZANU-PF really managing this economy, the Zimbabwean economy, in a very pragmatic way. But there's one question around President Robert Mugabe's legacy. Do you think it is going to have an effect on how the ZANU-PF government is going to be performing, running this economy for the sake of his legacy?
I don't think the big player in this next government will be the president. I think it will be more his technocrats and people surrounding him in government. And the legacy issues, as far as ZANU-PF is concerned, they seem to be done. They think that their president has 3 nodes of enduring legacy. First, independence and the liberation struggle itself. Secondly, the land reform exercise. And thirdly, and this is the most recent, indigenization and economic empowerment. So I think in relation to legacy, the legacy issues with President Mugabe are seen as a done deal. The big issue is the legacy of ZANU-PF as a party. Is it able to perform? Is it able to govern democratically and in tandem with people's interests?
From what you're saying, I'm getting a sense that, therefore, the role of the parliament will become really important for the next 5 years, because ZANU-PF has got a 2/3 majority in parliament, effectively controlling parliament. Do you think parliament is going to play that important role that we have not seen in the past years?
If this coming government is to be viewed as a good government or a legitimate government, and it has to perform democratically and in tandem with the people's interests, parliament has to play an effective role. In other words, parliament, even if it's dominated by ZANU-PF, cannot be a rubber stamping parliament. Because in the past, parliament was rubber stamping because either you had a one-party state proper, or you had an inclusive government where the three parties would agree, Parliament has to play an effective role, which includes democratic oversight of central government, regardless of the fact that there's one party with a majority in Parliament, as well as the one party that dominates the executive authority.
The use of the word "if" this government is seen as legitimate. You seem to have doubts around the legitimacy of...
Well, there's contestation about the legitimacy of the electoral process by players in the electoral process, the other political parties in that process. So, without a doubt, the legitimacy question will always be hanging. But now it's less about the electoral legitimacy, it's more about the performance legitimacy. Performance legitimacy being the ability of a government to remain relevant, to remain in tandem with the socio-economic challenges of the society and provide relevant and adequate solutions to the same.
Okay. Some people think the fact that ZANU-PF now has got 2/3 majority in Parliament, it effectively means the end of any chance of having, democratic rule in Zimbabwe. It's going to be a one-party state. Are there any chances of having a stronger democratic political environment in Zimbabwe, given the fact that ZANU-PF has effectively gone back to what it had in 1980?
Well, firstly, there's no one-party state. You have an opposition in Parliament. You have an opposition controlling some of the major urban authorities, local government authorities. So there's no one-party state. There might be an inference, an implication because of the 2/3 majority. But two-thirds majorities in terms of the parliamentary presence of ZANU-PF are key for constitutional changes. And rarely do you have, after a new constitution is brought into play, a party changing a constitution on wholesale to make it a one-party state again. So there is opposition in Zimbabwe. But now the key role of the opposition is less political or less politicized. Is to really tackle issues as they emerge and issues and challenges as they affect the people. And the same can be said for civil society. Civil society should not parrot political parties anymore. They have to literally do their groundwork, analyze issues fairly, accurately, and deal with these issues in a people-centered fashion, so that you have a modicum of balance. It's not just about executive authority, it's about what society is saying outside of the framework of central government.
Yeah, but Mr. Zhangazha, the ZANU-PF government, the ZANU-PF party, should I say, have already indicated that one of the first things that they would want to do is to strike out some of the things that they don't like in this new constitution, inferring that they are going to be taking away some of the things that the people of Zimbabwe thought were democratic gains coming out of this new constitution.
Well, any party with a 2/3 majority will always tinker with the constitution. I do not think that they will change the fundamentals of their new constitution. They won't do that because ZANU-PF's fundamentals were covered in the negotiation process, such as, land reform is irreversible, the values of the national liberation struggle, etc. So they're not going to change the fundamentals. They will tinker around with it, yes, but they won't change the fundamentals. But in any event, the constitution is not as democratic as one would expect and want, given the fact that it was a three-party constitution. The yes vote was stage-managed as a political process. So there is still the big challenge of actually attaining a democratic constitution in Zimbabwe. And this challenge resides both in all of the political parties as well as in civil society actors and ordinary citizens. The constitution we have, even though passed by the referendum, remains seriously flawed in terms of democratic values and frameworks.
Yeah. And Mr. Zhangazha, from where you are sitting, what does President Robert Mugabe's win of this election mean to Zimbabwe, Africa, and the international world? I see some kind of, rising or going against the grain, just like what happened in Kenya, where everyone expected Mr. Raila Odinga to win the election, and it turned out to be another result. What does his win mean to Africa, Zimbabwe, and the world?
Well, I think President Mugabe has had the general image of being a defiant African leader, defying the West, defying the North, somewhat of a nationalist, Pan-Africanist, and so on. So this victory for his party basically means in Africa that he will be viewed as such, he will be reconfirmed as such. in the West, he will be viewed again and continuously so as a pariah sort of leader, especially given the statements and the lack of acceptance by the United States of America, the United Kingdom, of the electoral result and outcome. So, yeah, the double meaning of ZANU-PF's victory will persist in relation to how the world views Zimbabwe. Africa will still view him as a Pan-Africanist, and especially a Pan-Africanist who has won an election, as they said, peacefully and freely. The West will still view him as a person who has governed his country badly, and that's not going to change in the short term. So the general perception around Zimbabwe will continue to be binary. Africa sort of like accepting his nationalistic or his party's nationalistic Pan-Africanist credentials, the West not accepting that and viewing him as his party as one that leads an undemocratic process and that probably stole an election.
But does the West have do they have any other option, given the fact that before this election they actually intimated that they are going to go with whatever SADC and the African Union would have said about the verdict of this election, and now they've endorsed this election? What are the options now left for the West? And also given the fact that before the elections that someone started to gradually remove some of the sanctions that have been imposed on Mr. Mugabe and his party officials?
I think in the short term, the West will still try and insist that the elections were not done in a free, fair, credible fashion. But in the long term, they will engage the ZANU-PF government in their own interests, in the interests of their business concerns, the interests of their political concerns, international security concerns. They will eventually engage the government. This is more short term. I think it's temporary, it's not long term.
Okay. Mr. Zhangazha, from the political events that has been happening after this election, what could be the future of Mr. Morgan Tsvangirai?
Well, his future is dependent on his party and his ability to manage any disaffection around his leadership of his party. So his future is basically one that dictates that he must go back to his membership, either by way of a national conference or by way of a congress, an extraordinary one, or he waits out the time until 2016 to defend his leadership. But nationally, his future is as a leader of the opposition. That is his future for now. There will be no new inclusive government. There will be no direct overtures for him to get a senior government position. He will fundamentally be a leader of the opposition in Zimbabwe.
So there's no chance of a second GNU?
Not based on the electoral results, because the first GNU was based on the parliamentary presence of the political parties, where the MDC had one more seat than ZANU-PF, and then the combined opposition seats were significantly more than ZANU-PF's. So that's why the GNU was facilitated by SADC. In this instance, you have ZANU-PF with 2/3 of the seats. There is no rationale for a proper inclusive government. It's up to the president to be benevolent and perhaps offer 1 or 2 members of the opposition cabinet seats, but that's really up to him. There's no political or even legal obligation that there be a second inclusive government.
And Mr. Zhangazha, I now want to come back to the issue of the MDC as we close this program. You highlighted in your earlier responses that there was this uncanny kind of, please mind my characterization of my characterization of what you said, an uncanny relationship between the civic society players and the MDC. Could it have somehow played a role in what has become of the MDC today? No. I think the big issue concerning the MDC's performance in this just ended harmonized electoral period is its own inability to function as a political party. The blame is not transferable because civil society was not running for office. MDC leaders and the MDC party was running for political office. And as a result thereof, it had to be literally internally organized and primed to run for office. And even if there are instances where it outsourced its role to civil society, that role cannot then be blamed on civil society. Civil society has no mandate to run for an election. It has a mandate to lobby various political parties
the MDC included, to run for office. So I don't think the relationship between civil society and MDC compromised its victory. It's like saying the relationship between ZANU-PF and the war veterans compromised its victory. No, it's ZANU-PF that would then be in a position to either say we won an election or we lost it. And it's the same that should be said for the MDC. The blame lies squarely on their doorstep, and the buck stopped with them. Whatever civil society did, yes, we can query and view civil society independently of the MDC, but the MDC is the one that is fundamentally to blame for its electoral performance.
And lastly, the MDC has, since its formation, witnessed quite a number of political splits. Are we likely to see the emergence of any new political parties after this election?
Oh,
being formed by people coming out of the MDC, although we know there are quite a lot of MDC members who are now disgruntled with the way things have been done, but are we likely to see an formation?
Yeah, you will definitely see new political parties, both in the short term or parties that emerge, as you say, after disputes around why they were not candidates with a specific party, specifically the MDC. But I think in this instance, you will see one or two long-term political parties, parties that will start existing 5 years before an election, as opposed to parties that start existing 2 weeks before an election. You're going to see one or two long-term political parties that will be a combination of disaffected MDC members, disaffected civil society actors and players, and just generally anticipatory citizens who want something different, something new, if it is offered.
This has been This is Africa, and thank you for joining us. And I would like to also thank my guest, Mr. Takura Zhangazha, a political analyst based here in Zimbabwe. Thank you, sir, for coming to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Until next time, it's bye from Zimbabwe.